Hello, my name is Daniela Garcia, and today I will be presenting on the topic of what the Fourth Amendment means for the privacy and security of the people, as well as how it applies to the digital content of the modern era. The Fourth Amendment protects the American people's rights to be secured in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. Its meaning is pretty straightforward, but the challenge arises when trying to apply said concepts to the ever-changing world of modern technology. All amendments, including the fourth, were designated for a world of hundreds of years ago that no longer exists. When the Founding Fathers were writing the Constitution, I'm sure that they couldn't even fathom the idea of something like the Internet, which is why they make sure that everything they wrote on paper would protect the people's undeniable rights, no matter the time to which they were being applied. In today's world, we're forced to rely on pure interpretation of the main concepts that each amendment embodies. However, nowadays, in plain 21st century, there is still certain legislation in place that constantly hinders the balance for maintaining justice and security and respecting people's privacy. Said legislation goes by the name of third-party doctrine and reasonable expectations of privacy test. And even though the reasonable expectation of privacy test has become obsolete due to not being able to keep up with the accelerated pace of evolving technologies, the third-party doctrine has been exploited to a point that it trumps even the protections given by the Fourth Amendment, therefore depriving people of their most basic rights to privacy. Richard Mason, a senior editor of the American conservative online paper, supports my claims through his own argument of digital property rights remaining far less defined than those for physical property. He also believes that modern applications of the Fourth Amendment are plagued by outdated understandings and poor definitions of digital property, and that modernization is desperately needed if constitutional rights are to be guaranteed in the 21st century. These images depicts the level of hypocrisy employed specifically by law enforcement authorities. On the left, you can see the policy stomping over the Fourth Amendment privacy rights on the grounds that they have been issued a warrant, which by the way is notoriously easy to obtain, even though in most cases there is not sufficient evidence to require one. This entitles the police to not having to behave by the book on situations in which they decide that immediate action is necessary. On the picture on the right, a situation is depicted of when they hide under the pretense that as long as you have nothing to fear or to hide, you should be fine with them eavesdropping or meddling in your affairs, whether they have probable cause or not. For me personally, this is one of the main issues of today's society. They sell you a bunch of reassuring lies in order to keep you from discovering the truth, that nowadays privacy is not even a privilege, but rather a non-existent concept. They try to make you believe that as long as you're innocent, you will remain innocent until proven guilty. However, the way in which they treat our privacy, which is with complete disregard, makes us think that they truly believe is that everyone is guilty or that can be guilty unless proven innocent. Brian Benson, senior security researcher, has conducted several studies which have all proven that every time you use the internet, there is an average of 10 different trackers looking at everything you do, while simultaneously reporting that data to any sort of company that might want it. What's more, there have been also other reports of police benefiting from everything you share with third parties, which includes everything from your phone's content to your banking activity, in order to aid in their investigations. All of these astonishing facts just makes me wonder if the kind of protection they are offering is truly worth the intrusion they have on every single aspect of our daily lives. Through these pictures, I really want to touch upon the topic of how the government makes us believe in one thing while they do something completely different behind closed doors. On the picture on the left, an unsuspecting family is shown being very confused after hearing that even though the war on terror is over, the NSA specifically will continue to monitor their cell phone activities just to make sure that everything is alright. The problem that I find with this picture is that I do not want to conform to the standard that since I have done nothing wrong, I must conform with having my entire life looked at and monitored at any given moment if deemed necessary, and all in the name of national security. As an American citizen, but more importantly as a human being, I want my life to remain mine and only mine, unless sufficient convincing evidence is presented to make me share any single aspect of my activities with any given authority. I do not want to have my online activity constantly searched and monitored because this is exactly the type of thing for which the Fourth Amendment was designed. Sadly, it is also in these moments in which I become aware of how big of a gap there is in implementing the Constitution on physical and tangible things, in contrast to implementing it on virtual information that we allegedly share willingly with everyone in exchange of the service they're providing. On the picture on the right, we see Big Brother ideal version of society, one that only exists under the watchful eye of the greater powers. And even though we might think that this type of intruding activities only happens in the US via the NSA or the CIA, the truth is that every single country around the world has an agency designated to partake in spying on their citizens as well. Or, as agencies prefer to phrase it, keeping a watchful eye for the sake of the people. For example, outside of the US, we have Russia's Federal Security Service, China's Ministry of State Security, the United Kingdom's Secret Intelligence Service, and for all of those who watch the famous TV show NCIS, Navy Criminal Investigation, Israel's Institute for Intelligence and Special Operations, also known as Mossad. According to Barry Friedman and Orin Kerr, one of the most difficult questions to define today is that of how to define what constitutes a search or seizure on a person or their properties. Also, when is a search acceptable if the government has no suspicion that a person has done anything wrong? Nevertheless, what should be clear by now is that advancing technology and the many cyber threats that society faces today add up to a major problem in which the Fourth Amendment will continue to play a central role as long as it is not modified to adapt to modern times. In the two pictures shown here, we see the two sides of the coin. On the left, you can clearly see that someone is always watching, and on the right, you can see how little agencies like to be questioned about the true extent of their intrusion on people's lives. In my opinion, the third-party doctrine is what ultimately stands as one of the most significant obstacles in the road to modifying the Fourth Amendment. Applying the doctrine to a telephone conversation may be justifiable since very little information can be gathered from a pen registered, aside from who was being called. However, the same cannot necessarily be said for computers. More importantly, we provide far more of our information to our internet service providers and social networks than we ever did to phone companies. Richard Benson once again supports my claims through the statement that while the third-party doctrine may have only given government officials access to a limited amount of information back then, it now provides them with a potential backdoor into a wealth of personal data. Until the third-party doctrine is removed from the American legal system, it is my honest belief that the Fourth Amendment cannot truly be brought into the 21st century. In my last slide, I added the picture of George Orwell's novel 1984, since its main plot point related to my main argument, that the more surveillance the government enforces on its citizens, the less secure they feel, and the more society will descend into chaos. Even though this claim may seem a little bit dramatic, think about it. If history has taught us anything, what is the main activity that people resort to in order to fight oppression and unfair policies? The answer is simple. They rebel. Nowadays, rebellions are nothing like the ones we've experienced in the past, especially here in America. Today, we have talks, discussions, marches, and other civilized activities to make sure that the people's voices is heard and respected. After all, our government should be for the people and by the people. Even when the major powers at play like to disregard the public's demands, the people shall always emerge victorious. And to ensure that this is always the case, several adjustments need to be made in several areas of the government as a whole. For these presentations, I chose to only focus on the one that I believe that it's the most necessary for the world that we are creating. But of course, there will always be room for improvement. Anyhow, I want to conclude this presentation with the words of Senior Editor Matthew Finney and Judge Herbert B. Dixon Jr. Most of the doctrines after, but including the third-party one, have left some of the most intrusive surveillance technologies outside of the purview of the Fourth Amendment challenge. and ultimately allowing the police to scrutinize a person's personal records on a routine basis differs greatly from allowing them to search a personal item or two in the occasional case, which just further shows with how much urgency we need the reforms to the Fourth Amendment to take place.